just got our biggest quote from Jimmy Butler yet, suggesting that his contract demands he made earlier this offseason may not be as demanding anymore. I'll break down that quote as well as other quotes from NBA insiders and analysts who suggest this may be the biggest year yet for Jimmy Butler in a Miami Heat uniform. So let's get to it and break down all the news in this massive Jimmy Butler news. Now, I say this is the biggest quote we've got surrounding Jimmy Butler all off season long. And the reason I say that before we get to the quote is because of how last season ended. Obviously, Jimmy Butler only played in 60 of the 82 games last season during the regular season. We got to the playoffs. Obviously, he gets injured in the first round of the play-in tournament with the right MCL. We go on to win the second round of the play-in tournament. We go to the first round of the playoffs. We lose to the Boston Celtics in 5 games where Jimmy Butler did not play a single minute due to the right MCL sprain he suffered in the first round of the play-in. Now, immediately after that series ended the following day, not even 24 hours later, Jimmy Butler came out and made contract demands for the Miami Heat because he wants to be there until X age so he can walk away from the sport and retire as a Miami Heat player in hopes that he wins in the time it takes to get to that age. Now, it may only be 2 years, it may be 3 years, but as we know, Jimmy Butler right now is under contract with this Miami Heat team, and he has 1 year left after this following year, and it'll be a player option. So Jimmy Butler could walk away after this season and test free agency, or he could come back to the Miami Heat and play for that last year under a player option for the Miami Heat, which is a $52 million year, the highest out of his 3-year contract. We'll break down the contract in just a second, but we have to break down this massive quote from Heat Nation, citing Anthony Chang, as he goes on to say, Jimmy Butler on his extension. Now, Jimmy Butler goes on to say, and I quote, "If we're being brutally honest, nothing I do now is going to get me paid any more money, even though I don't care about the money." And then he goes on to say, all NBA, none of that is going to matter. I'm at a point right now that I got more than enough money. I'm just here to win. And that's the end of the quote from Jimmy Butler. Now, the reason not only is this the biggest quote from Jimmy Butler up to this date is not only because he's saying, hey, I got more than enough money. I don't need a ransom of money to come back for X amount of years. I'm just looking for the years. That's how I'm taking this. He just wants to be under contract with this Miami Heat team going forward as long as he really has value and he's going to be in the league. Now, if that's the case, I feel very good about this because Jimmy Butler, like we mentioned earlier, he's going into that 2024-2025 season. Next year will be the 2025-2026 season where he will have a player option. If you look under the cap hit, he will be given $52 million, which again will be the highest out of the last 3 years annually. So again, it's not like he's not going to be getting paid handsomely in a ransom. He's going to be taken care of very, very well as someone who's going to be 36 years of age at the point of this contract actually going into the works. So it's huge for Jimmy Butler to come out and acknowledge this. Hey, I don't need to be paid a lot. I know the demands I made earlier were what they were. They're not. That's not what they were or are anymore. I just need to be under contract on this Miami Heat team, regardless of how much money I'm actually being paid. Now we'll move on to the other quotes that I think are just as big. Obviously, these aren't coming from Jimmy Butler himself, but these are from notable names covering the league for some time now, obviously in Bill Simmons, and then an ex-NBA player in the next one who has 2 quotes about Jimmy Butler. But again, these are huge because obviously they're notable minds in the game of basketball. They've been doing it for so long. And for them to say this about Jimmy Butler makes me feel even better about this Miami Heat team going forward, being led by Jimmy Butler, obviously. Now, shout out to Emo Jimmy on Twitter. As always, he is always the best at citing the Miami Heat, but he goes on to say Bill Simmons podcast on Jimmy Butler showing up to media day locked in. He goes on to say, and I quote, "He's absolutely not fucking around. Jimmy Butler taking the regular season serious is a massive fucking deal for the Heat. They can make the finals as a 7 seed, but you should not try to do that. I'm back in." And that's the end of the quote from Bill Simmons. And again, this is massive. Bill Simmons obviously talks about the Miami Heat a lot and really every team in the NBA and a lot of the star players, but it's usually on the negative side of things. Obviously last season and even in this past offseason, we've discussed quotes from Bill Simmons and they're usually of the negative connotation. Unfortunately, obviously, but again, a lot of the time he is accurate. He's just very, very brutally honest and it's not really the way the Miami Heat fans want it to go. But again, he's been pretty accurate. Hopefully this is true. And he's referring to how Jimmy Butler showed up looking like default Jimmy. And what do I mean by that? He showed up with his normal haircut, his normal look, if you will. Now, he didn't show up looking like emo Jimmy. He didn't show up with the massive long dreadlocks. He showed up headband on, default Jimmy Butler, and this is what we're expecting from him. 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal per game, shooting around 50% from the field. If we can get that Jimmy Butler for more than 60 games out of the year for long stretches of time, I think he can propel this Miami Heat team to not only be a top 5 seed in the East, but compete throughout the playoffs. Now, we have the talent, and if Jimmy Butler is at the helm, we have the leadership. There's no way around it. And obviously when he's on the floor and he plays more than a few consecutive games at a time, he is a problem. There's no way around it. And I don't just mean with his ability to score the basketball. His ability to lead on and off the floor is otherworldly. We've heard the stories about when he was in Minnesota, when he was in Chicago, when he was in Philly. He's the guy. He's, without a doubt, there's no other real way around it. He is the guy on and off the floor, and we need that guy in Miami. Now, going on to the next quotes, I know I'm just using guys that we don't usually love to hear the opinion of in Bill Simmons and now Kendrick Perkins, but again, they are positives. Now, this is from NBA on ESPN on Twitter, tagging Kendrick Perkins, says the Heat will need a locked-in Jimmy Butler this season, going on to say, and I quote, "They have no room for error when it comes down to the Miami Heat." And again, he's not wrong. If we go out and we lose our first 10 out of 20 games, or we lose 12 or 10 or more games out of our first 20, we're going to be in trouble, because trying to flip that boat around, obviously I have faith in the roster that we have at hand, and especially the coaching staff with Eric Spoelstra at the helm. But again, the league is getting more and more competitive. Orlando didn't get any worse. They're in division, and then without the in-conference matchups are going to be ridiculous. Philly, New York, Boston. It is just going to go on. And then when we go out west, it's not getting any easier. And the Miami Heat, again, like Kendrick Perkins said, no errors allowed. We cannot come into this season fucking around, if you will. Excuse my French. But we don't have time to do it. Now, again from Kendrick Perkins, again from Emo Jimmy, shout out to you. Kendrick Perkins expects Jimmy Butler to be, and I quote, locked in this season. Going on to say, and I quote from Kendrick Perkins, "They have no room for error when it comes down to the Miami Heat. They will get a locked-in Jimmy Butler, and I also trust their player development." End of quote from Kendrick Perkins. And again, I agree with this. It's not being negative. He's being very, very honest. He's being to the point. We can't have a lot of errors. We can't come out and lose a bunch of games. We can't come out and not have our footing set when we step on the floor for our game 1 of 82. I know the preseason didn't look great, but again, it's the preseason. Take it with a grain of salt. It's not, that rotation won't be the same when we get into the actual game 1 of 82 and get into the actual nitty-gritty of the regular season. Because of that, we need to have some faith in this Miami Heat team. And again, it has to start with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has to be there as much as he possibly can. He needs to be as available as possible, and there's no other way around it. Obviously, we addressed how he only played in 60 of the 82 games last season, especially not the ones in the playoff, as well as 64 the year before that, 57 3 years ago, 52 4 years ago, and then 58, 55, and then 10, obviously an injury-riddled season 6 years ago. But we need 70, 75 plus from Jimmy Butler, and if he's not playing in those games, it needs to be for damn good reason. And if he just wants rest, if he plays 35 games in a row and he says, "Hey, we're playing the Charlotte Hornets tonight, we should win convincingly," I should probably be able to sit for a majority of this game, probably start, come out, not play a lot of minutes, maybe 4 minutes a quarter, 3 minutes a quarter, just to allow him to actually rest. That is one thing. But we cannot have long periods of games where Jimmy Butler is just flat out absent from this Miami Heat roster. It will produce very bad things for this Miami Heat team going forward throughout this season, and it'll just break up chemistry. We cannot have that. We need a collective team this year that plays a lot of games together in order to really be successful in a very, very competitive league. But again, that will be it for this episode of Heat Digest. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one.